Welcome back, you guys. This is Mark with NCEngravers, and today we're going to be working on the SAR 9 Sport Model Slide. Very interesting video here today. We have a lot of people that reach out to us about the standard model, about the sport model. They want to add an optic to the slide. They're unsure of iron sights that are needed. They don't know what optics are supported. They don't understand why they have holes in the top of their slide. Guys, I want to talk about all of that. I want to cover every bit of what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, what iron sights you should be doing, what is supported, some of the optics that are not supported, and why. I hope to cover all of that with you guys in this build video here today. Okay, first and foremost, let's start with the screw holes in the top of the slide. Do not use these. I don't even quite understand the logic behind this, and let me explain myself. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below if I've missed something. I'm not sure if this dovetail comes out, there's a plate that goes in here and then it gets locked in with these screws, or if they're just assuming you're going to put the optic directly on top of the slide. Now, my guess, and I'm only guessing here, is that most people are going to remove this dovetail and try to mount a Vortex Venom because that is the optic that aligns with the screw holes, but I still don't understand the logic. It sits on top of the rear iron sight, so this has to come out in order for this to go on. Once again, I don't understand that. I mean, you know, this probably could have been pushed further forward, and they probably could have sold the rear sight if they were going to do that. But once again, I do not understand why they're doing what they're doing. Let's talk about that a little bit more. The Glock MOS, the Hellcat OSP, the Shield optic ready model, the P365 XL or the X model. These are all optic ready pistols on the market, and none of them are like this. They either have a socket cut out, much like you'd see the dovetail, where the optic is held in the front, it's held in the rear, or they use a mounting plate that goes into the slide, where the mounting plate is supported in the front and the back, and then they have these studs that hold the optic in place along with the screws. So none of these are just saying, screw your optic to your slide and hope it doesn't punch you in the face on the weekend and basically cause you to go to the hospital and get stitches, because more than likely that's probably what's going to happen. It's a horrible idea of engineering. I would never recommend this, and somewhere along the way somebody's going to get hurt doing this. So with that being said, guys, we're not going to be using this. We're not going to be recommending this. This is just a no-go. We're going to cut right through these. This guy's going to come off. Let's talk about the work that we are going to do. Let's explain it a little bit better. So we have a customer that obviously sent this slide in, and they wanted to do an optic cut. They want to do a 407-507C. Keep in mind that is the same as an RMR, and it's also very similar to the Holosun 508T, which does actually use a little bit smaller footprint. But the point being made is that any of those four models or anything else that fits the RMR socket, the Swamp Box Kingslayer, would all end up fitting this same cut. Now, a lot of you have this idea of, why don't we just mount it into the slide in front of the rear sight? We'll keep the rear sight, we'll do a co-witness. This won't actually work because we have a roll pin, an extractor, and then there's a plunger on the bottom side. So if this guy was cut here and if we were cutting it down into the slide to the correct depth, we'd be very far over top of that plunger, and that plunger would be punching up into the bottom side of the optic. And in this case, it's not sealed on the bottom of the RMRs. We don't see that in some of the other optics, but on the RMRs, it would cause a problem, right? So we would have to shorten the spring. We may have an issue with the plunger itself hitting the optic, and this is just a no-go. So guys, what we do is we remove this from the slide. This would go to the rear of the slide, and then we're going to cut a new iron sight in front of the optic, allowing for a co-witness setup. Now, something else to keep in mind is you're going to have to upgrade your iron sights anyhow in order to work with the optic, because the optic does sit up above the top of the slide. So suppressor, rear sight, Glock, front sight, Glock. These are both going to be Glocks. Okay, so this hole will support a Glock iron sight. This new one we cut will support a Glock suppressor sight as well, a rear one. Let's talk about the iron sights that we recommend for this build. There's several different models that will work. A lot of people go with the AmeriGlow GL 429. Now, this is an all black set of iron sights. They do that because what happens is whenever you put the optic on the slide and then you have your iron sights, they don't want to be chasing a dot, two rear dots, and a front dot. So it's a little bit easier for your eyes to pick up black irons and an optic. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people go with the GL 429. Another option would be the GL 511. Now, the only difference between these two is that the front sight, and maybe you can see it, the front sight is orange and it is a night sight, but the back sight is still a all black suppressor rear sight. These are the same height, okay? So there's no difference, you know, one doesn't stick up higher than the other. They are the exact same. The only difference is this happens to be a glowing outlined orange night sight, and then this is an all black sight. Now, if you want to go just straight up with night sights, you can go with Trijicon. They sell several different versions. If you want to stick with Ameriglow, that model would be called the GL329. So it's one digit down from the 429. 429 being all black, 329 being all night sights. So that's going to kind of give you the understanding there. Now, let's talk about some of the other optics. I know some of you guys are like, well, why don't we just do a micro dot optic here? We don't do micro dots, which would be the 407, the 507K, the Romeo 0. We do not offer that optic cut, and it's mostly because when this is all taken down and the firing pin comes out, there is actually a little spring and a plunger on this side, very similar to what you'd see with a Glock, but keep in mind, there is an actual roll pin holding the extractor in versus Glock has a pin through here. And the issue is that right where that hole is, ends up causing problems with the screw on a micro dot optic. So it doesn't cause any issues with the regular size. I'm actually going to grab one, have one sitting right here. So if this was sitting on here, okay, and it would fit, the issue is that those screws are closer in center than what we see here, and of course once this is recessed into the slide, those screws would be right into where that plunger is. Now, if you're curious what that plunger is, what it does, it holds that rear cap in. Okay, so the firing pin does put pressure on the rear cap, and then like a Glock, there would be an extractor, a plunger, and then a spring basically in the back holding the cap on. In this case, what it is a dead hole, so they've got it zeroed out here. They drill in, they end up putting a spring in there and a plunger, and that just puts pressure on the rear cap, holding the rear cap into the slide. So we got to make sure that still works. We don't want the rear cap to fall out. So guys, what we're going to do at this point is we're going to get this thing taken down. We're going to go ahead and get the cut work done, and then we're going to bring it back. One of the things I do want to take note on before we start that is you will need to replace the sights no matter what when sending in for an optic cut, because 95% of the time that front sight is glued in so tight that it will break and become damaged when coming out. Now, we don't always see that on the colored guns. This is a tungsten, okay? But if it's a black gun, guaranteed you're probably not going to get that out without destroying it. So best bet is to, even if you're like, I don't want to dovetail, but I do want to upgrade my front sight, go with just a suppressor sight or an upgraded Glock sight because it fits that same socket. So guys, let's jump over into the cut work. Let's bring it back. Let's take a look and see what it looks like, and I'm going to give you some further information once we complete this. Alright guys, now that we've completed the cut work, the iron sights have been installed, the internal components have been put back in. We also have a fresh new coating of tungsten, which is a direct match to the existing factory coating. Let's just quickly review it. I want to give you a couple comments about some things, and hopefully we've covered everything that you need to know in order to place your order. Optic cut to the rear of the slide, relocated rear iron sight has been moved to the front of the optic. This is a dovetail cut for a Glock style, as we discussed earlier in the video. These are the iron sights that were provided from the customer. Once again, if you provide them, we'll put them in. And I do think this is the best setup. You know, optic to the rear. You do have the option of not doing the dovetail and just removing the factory dovetail. However, it really just doesn't work all that well with a full co-witness with an optic. So putting the new iron sight in front of the optic is the best choice. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to show this before we put the optic on the slide is we have a radius front, we have a straight back, which leads us to having a solid footprint cut for the optics. We're not getting a lot of wiggle room in here. So that's kind of the way that we cut our optics. The other thing I want to take note of is, if you guys can see, there's a dimple and dimple. We do plug and we fill those existing holes that are on the slide from the screw holes that they put in there for mounting. So we go ahead and plug and fill those. One, they're not really usable because they're not that deep. And two, we want to make sure there's no confusion for the owner or future owners if it's sold on what are these holes, where do they come from, and what are they used for. So we plug those, make sure it looks the best it can possibly look. We've got a Trijicon RMR And you can see that this fits this socket real nice like. This is exactly what it would look like. Of course, we will include some pictures to kind of show that. I'm not sure we'll probably end up getting a picture here through the video, but I will include one here that shows how it aligns. This is what you would consider to be a co-witness setup, a full co-witness setup, not necessarily a lower third. Sometimes a lower third would be a little bit lower. Once again, we gave you guys the Optic, we gave you guys the iron sight model, so you could always go back and see how tall these are and choose something just a little bit shorter if you're looking for something that's a little bit lower. One of the other notes I want to take here is on the factory front sight, if you look, and it is hard to tell, there's a little bit of an oval gap on each side here. Now keep in mind, I do believe that a front sight is sold specific to this model and not just a Glock sight. However, a Glock sight will work perfectly fine. If this is some sort of an issue to you, or you just don't like to see this, and once again, you can kind of see it, I will include a picture. You could get an iron sight that has a wider footprint. The Trijicon front sights are very square. They're almost probably twice as wide as what you'd find with an Ameriglow, so that would cover that hole completely. You're not going to get any extra strength or extra tightness or extra whatever by having a different, wider sight, because keep in mind the hole, the actual hole that the iron sight goes into is the same on all the slides because they fit the same socket on the Glock. So we're not going to just get, we're not going to have a tighter fit to that socket, but what we are going to do is have more of a covering fit to that hole. So that's one thing that I want to take note of. Guys, keep in mind that, services are always changing. Something that you may not see today, if you go there and you don't see a listing for services offered, you may see it later. So we would encourage you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Please leave a comment on YouTube. It helps the algorithm just sort us out, and it allows other people to find us a little bit easier. Of course, if we've missed anything, if there's something that you're curious about, we overlooked it, we just didn't discuss it, please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer that. We may also put an answer on our webpage if it seems as though it was something big that we might have missed. So we want to make sure that we've kind of included all those. And once again, we have some other videos coming up here shortly, so we would encourage you to subscribe on our YouTube channel and just kind of stay updated with the services that we do offer.